Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unrestricted Sports. Today, we are joined with a special guest, Ben, one of Nolan's friends. He's a guest of the show, and today we are going to be talking about the Lacrosse League and basically how we think all the teams are going to stack up in their tournament coming up. So, Nolan and Ben both know a lot more about lacrosse than I do, so they're going to be mostly leading this conversation, and I'm mostly going to be listening in. So, Nolan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So to clarify the league we're talking about the Premier Lacrosse League. In my opinion, the only relevant lacrosse league at this point. Maybe the NLL, but for now we're talking PLL. So Ben, it's good to have you on. We'll start with the Archers. Let me know what you think about the Archers.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So the Archers, they're an interesting team. You know, they looked like they were going to stack up pretty well last year. They kind of fell short in the playoffs, though. They were on a hot streak, but I mean, they have the addition of Brett Ament, so that's going to be a huge pickup for them. They drafted him first overall out of college this year. He's from Penn State, just explosive, one-of-a-kind player. They're really going to transform that attack. It's going to be pretty nasty because they also have Marcus Holman and Will Manny that were also a pretty dangerous 1-2 punch. And now you got Brant Ament to round out the top three. The D is solid. They also drafted Eli Gobrecht from the entry draft this past offseason. So basically, they've upgraded almost every position. And, I mean, it's really going to be hard for a team to compete with them with that attack. And they really upgraded their defense.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I guess I'm getting vibes from the Archers at least that they're gonna be a team similar to what the Atlas were last year, where on paper they should be a contender, but in actuality they just kind of disappoint. Especially looking at who they play. I really don't like their schedule. It starts off tough, it ends tough, and the middle's tough. Granted, they play Chrome, but I don't think Chrome's going to be nearly as bad as they were last year.
Yeah, and if you think about it, Chrome wasn't even that bad last year. They lost 5 games by 1 goal, so they were right in it. And, I mean, they did face some really tough decisions going into this championship series roster, where you have to whittle it down to 25 players on your total roster and 22 to travel. They lost basically their entire starting defense and a lot of their midfield due to them having other jobs and other things they have to attend to, where they can't go and stay in a bubble for 3.5 weeks. So that was a pretty tough loss. But I think the Atlas, I agree with you. I think they might disappoint. And I mean, it's really hard to tell, especially because every team in this league is so good and the players are so talented that, I mean, any team could realistically win the championship
Right.
this year.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things, especially for the Archers, like you were saying, every player is so talented, and the depth on every team, the depth is incredible for every team. Obviously, in different areas. For the Archers, that looks to be midfield and attack is where their depth is really the strongest. But besides those two, obviously their goalies. You look at they play 4 games over the length of 5 or 6 days. So I think, depending on, obviously, like the Archers did last year, I would assume they would split time between Adam and Gittleman. But having a strong backup on any team definitely will prove to be handy.
Yeah, I think that combo, that goalie tandem, is going to be huge for the Archers.
Yeah.
Especially with these. I mean, it's 16 games in 20 days for this entire tournament, and I think that's going to be. It's really key is who can play, how good is their cardio, stamina, and do you have reserves if people need it? which is hard, especially with a 22-man roster cutoff.
Agreed.
But the goalie tandem, I think, will be really huge if one of them's having a bad day. We saw last year that they would just throw in the other one, and usually they would have a pretty good game. For depth, though, what's really nice is they have Brendan Fowler and Stephen Kelly at faceoff, two really athletic faceoff guys. I think that's going to be a huge, huge, huge asset because faceoff, I mean, is one of the harder positions on the field. If you get caught up in it, you might have to play defense. If you get a nice win, you have to run it up to offense. And even if you're not going to stay on and maybe attempt for a goal, like Kelly did, scoring the first goal of the PLL last season. I mean, it's just a lot of wear and tear and a lot of running and a lot of hard-fought battles trying to escape those wings, the LSM and midfielders lined up, just pounding those face-off guys.
Yeah, I think I don't know how much of a split there will be at face-off, to be honest with you. I would imagine that the games are probably going to start out relatively slow because every team knows how much they're playing in such a short amount of time. So I would imagine no team is going to be going, balls to the wall immediately, at least. But looking at the Archers roster, specifically, last thing on the Archers, I want to ask you a question about their defense. It looks to me, at least, that the Archers kept intact their solid attack pairing with Holman and Manny. Obviously added Grant Amon, so that's good. But they lost a little bit at D. I think their defense isn't going to be as good as it might have been last year. Whereas comparatively to the Whip Snakes lost some of their attackmen, obviously, because they have Matt Rambo, but then kept their solid defense intact. Do you see that the decline in defense being better or the decline in attack being better, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think you always got to take the decline in attack over decline in defense. I mean, I know they say it a lot in football, but it's very true in lacrosse. Defense wins championships. And, I mean, I don't know how this Archers D is going to play. Gobrecht is a huge addition for them from the entry draft. But we have to see how he's going to mesh with those other guys. And a couple of their starters aren't back on the roster for various reasons. So it'll be pretty interesting to see. Again, they have Scott Ratliff up at LSM, so worst case scenario, I'm sure he could play a little bit of close D. But yeah, I would definitely go for the decline in the offense rather than a decline in defense because, again, your midfielders could, if they have to, make up for the attack if necessary.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Moving on, we'll move on to the Atlas now. I think I'll start off on the Atlas. I'm a big Atlas fan, and I'm intrigued, to be honest. In the expansion draft, I expected them to lose different players than they lost, but their roster got better all around the board. Despite the loss of Tucker Durkin to at least start the championship series. I think that their roster is all around much better than it was last year, which surprises me because they were supposed to be good last year. But I think the addition of Jeremy Thompson and Romar Dennis at midfield is going to allow Rabel to spend more time on offense and get off and let other people play defense. In addition to the addition of Brian Costable, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. But I really like the Atlas midfield, and that's not even mentioning Rob Pennell. But the only issue I see with this team in this series is the loss of Tucker Durkin. He was, as the PLL promotes, Tucker Durkin is the voice of the Atlas defense. And the Atlas lost him for 2 weeks. So I definitely think that Austin Pafami is going to have to step up. I don't have a ton of faith in him, but I think most of all, Caleb Robinson is going to have to prove that he is an elite defender at this level still. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll leave you off on this, Ben. But I think another problem, actually, now that I'm thinking about it and looking at their roster, I think they might have too much talent at midfield. I don't know if that's possible, but I feel like there could be an issue here where the coach could come to a point where it's like, well, who do I put on the field? I'll let you speak more on Brian Constable, but with Buchek, Rabel, Dennis, Joel Tinney, Jeremy Thompson, there's just so much talent that I think a problem could be overloading on midfield, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, they have a new coach this year, Ben Rubior, new head coach. I mean, you kind of have to bring in a new head coach after such a disappointing season with so much talent on their roster last year. I agree with you. They definitely upgraded. I mean, they drafted Brian Costabile at midfield, second overall. It was basically he and Grant Ament were pretty much the top two, clear, far and above, different in this draft, if that makes sense. Those were the guys that are going to make an immediate difference in the PLL, in the pros. Who knows? Other guys might be able to surprise who were drafted this year, but those two are going to be huge. But you got Costabile. You now have a healthy Paul Rabel, who has talked about how he was dealing with some lingering back injuries last season. And then you also pick up Jeremy Thompson, like you said, off of waivers. And then they traded for Romar Dennis, which Romar Dennis didn't have a great start with the Chrome last season. But if you look at his history, he's going to be, I think, a pretty good weapon. But I agree, there could be a little bit of trouble with, all right, who's getting what minutes, who's relief, who's starting. I think that could potentially be an issue at midfield. But, I mean, so many of these teams, again, like we said, are super talented. So they're already balancing really talented players backing up other really talented starting players. At any moment, a starting and a backup job could completely flip, like we saw with Jules Hendenberg, who was just a backup on the Whip Snakes' elite attack and just tore it up when he got traded to the Redwoods.
Yeah, I think the Atlas is a pretty basic team to talk about. There's what they can do is very clear, and what they might do is even clearer, if that makes sense. I think this team is destined for a championship now. It's one of those teams where it's like the Buccaneers in football. You know, you get Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, and you know those guys aren't going to be around for long, so you have to win now. Not saying Rob Pennell and Paul Rabel and all these other guys are getting archaic by any means, but it's definitely not a wait and grow type of team. I got one more question for you on the Atlas, and it's this. Obviously, Tucker Durkin, it was a huge loss hearing about that, like I noted. And this isn't meant to overshadow the addition of Rob Pennell because that addition was fantastic, but I think the hype is there, so why talk about it? But with the loss of Tucker Durkin and knowing who's on that restricted list, I think the Atlas might have messed up. You let me know what you think, but I think with looking at their restricted list, they didn't really bring anybody on that list that could replace a defensive loss like Durkin.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Durkin's out for testing positive to COVID-19, so he had to go back home and quarantine for another 2 weeks before he can rejoin the team, potentially in week 2. So, I mean, yeah, the restricted roster, I mean, again, it's only 3 additional people from the travel roster, and it's James Fennell and Brent Noseworthy at attack, and then Andrew Hodgson at midfield. Yeah, you're right. I mean, they have very, very little options other than their current defense. I mean, they drafted Craig Chick in the entry pool along with Rob Pennell, and then they also have Kyle Hartzell. So, worst case scenario, those LSMs could move back to defense, but I mean, it all really hinges on how well Austin Fafani plays, and then if that defense can really mesh without the leadership of Tucker Durkin just long enough for him to get back
Agreed.
And healthy, because they opted to wait for him to come back rather than replace him, like where the Archers replaced Evan Cannell, who tested positive, with Jack Rapine, the guy they drafted 11th overall in the college draft, which I actually think is, just to go back to the Archers real quick, I actually think is a good move for the Archers, because Rapine was a pretty solid college player, and Cannell hasn't really done anything yet in the PLL.
Agreed.
But, yeah, I mean, the COVID losses are really, really tough. It's hard for coaches to foresee who they're going to lose.
Yeah. Yep. I can't really think of any other notable things with the Atlas. Looking at their schedule real quick for this upcoming group, their matches in the tournament, and I see a strong start and a tough finish. Water Dogs and Archers. I think Water Dogs first is obviously a tough opponent because everybody's so talented in this league. But a team's first game together, you can't expect them to come in and play lights out. They obviously could. Who knows? But in my eyes, I don't see the Water Dogs coming out super strong in their first game. Moving on, they got a relatively simple in relative terms, middle of the pack schedule, and then they end probably with the other hardest team in the league right now, and that's the Redwoods. And we'll get to them in just a minute here. But for now, let's move on to the Chaos and talk about what was quite an interesting offseason, to say the least. Yeah, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Towers is a phenomenal coach, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how good of a GM he is, because in PLL, the coaches double as coaches and general managers, basically, for these teams, because most of the teams are league-owned, with the exception of the Water Dogs, who, pardon my take, has an ownership stake in. But, yeah, he made some really questionable decisions about who to protect and who not to protect. I mean, it's not a bad roster by any means.
Yeah.
You've got, but I mean, he lost a couple of big players in the expansion draft to the Water Dogs, and then rather than really fill those holes, he decided to draft Dylan Ward in the entry draft, who, don't get me wrong, is a phenomenal goalie. But you already got Blaze Reardon, who is also, again, a top-tier lights-out goalie. So that move, at least to me, didn't really make sense. And then we have the Sergio Salcido for Miles Jones trade. I mean, Miles Jones, I guess, didn't really fit schematically.
Yeah, it was system fit.
Yeah. But I think, while Sergio Salcido is a good player, I think there's a very, very large drop-off in just talent between Salcido and Jones.
Agreed. I think in response to your comment on Dylan Ward, on the drafting of Dylan Ward, I think you can really only rely on two goalies to play every game for their team, and I don't think Blaze Reardon is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like I mentioned, you have so many games in such a short amount of time that you're going to have to probably use a backup goalie here or there. The Archers have that covered. The Chaos have that covered now with the drafting of Dylan Ward. But I think you'll see teams like the Redwoods and the Atlas specifically stick to their starting goalie.
Yeah.
I don't foresee Tim Troutner needing a backup. Not because he's so superior athletically speaking compared to other goalies, and same thing with Kincannon. But I think those guys are the elite goalies. Not to say Blaze Reardon's bad by any means, but if you have Dylan Ward sitting on your bench, why not play him? I don't think the Atlas have the world's faith in Scotty Rogers. I know I don't anymore. I think he's just there because Paul Rabel's on the team. And I can say the same for the Redwoods. I don't think Tim Troutner, being as good as he is, needs a replacement. I think Tim Troutner is one of those goalies where you can say, all right, Timmy, you stay in there. No matter how tired you are, you keep playing well, and he'll do it. But anyways, getting back to the chaos, I don't know if I like the Sergio Salcido for Miles Jones trade, but it could be a system thing. Like we've mentioned, Andy Towers is a very good coach, so we really won't know until they play. But it looks like they went into somewhat of like a rebuilding kind of phase, on paper at least. Their defense is still good, obviously speaking. But with the losses they sustained, it just boggles my mind how this team would think that they have a shot. If you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think, obviously there's still a lot of really good players on this team, but they had shakeups in not ideal and pretty interesting places. And it is weird because you mentioned going into a bit of a rebuilding phase, but they drafted Matt Gaudette in the entry draft, and then quickly, after describing how well he would fit in their system, again, because I guess the only reason the Salcido-Jones trade makes sense is if to fulfill a system flaw, is to... Well, they talked about having a good system with Matt Gaudette and how he would slot in perfectly, and then they trade him to the Chrome. So, there were a couple of interesting... I don't really understand what their whole game plan is going in. Like, are they trying to rebuild? Are they trying to make a play? Because they didn't really make any moves that would let them make a play. They didn't lose too many people too badly. So... I don't know. I think it's a lot of it is up in the air. At least in terms of the chaos success.
Yeah, definitely agree. Speaking of the Chrome, or actually before we move on to the Chrome, we'll talk about the chaos schedule real quick. Chaos schedule looks pretty... Their first game against the Chrome, I think that'll be an interesting one with the uncertainties with the Chrome. But they definitely have a tough remaining 3 games with the Woods, Whips, and Dogs. Not to abbreviate all their names, but they have a very, what could be a very daunting schedule and a very difficult string of games that they'll have to definitely be prepared for. And with the losses they sustained, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, and just to bounce off that, the last game that the Water Dogs and the Chaos play, at least before the elimination round, is against each other. And for the same reason that you described how the Water Dogs versus Atlas, the first game for both of those teams, could be a little lopsided in the Atlas favor just because the Water Dogs haven't played together. By the time the Chaos face off against the Water Dogs, you will have these very, very talented group of individuals. It's basically, honestly, almost the cream of the crop from every team. They managed to snag 1 or 2 really, really high-quality players from each team.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time the Chaos are facing up against them, I think they will have had to have matched by then. So I think that just makes it even harder for the Chaos because you're not going to be playing a team that you can't really count on to not know how each other play.
Yeah.
After 3 previous games.
Yep. Speaking of Chrome, we will move on to them. looking at their roster going into this championship series, I see one problem, two problems in particular. I'll start off with what I think is going to be a huge upside for them. I definitely think getting Matt Gaudette with Jordan Wolf and Justin Gutterding is going to be really good. They have a lot of depth at attack and a lot of depth at defense, which I like because their defense was spotty last year. So you have extra guys to put in there if somebody starts playing bad. But the one thing I don't really like about the Chrome is their goalie situation. I'm not the highest or the biggest fan on Galloway or Queener, let alone the tandem of them. I think obviously they're two of the best, 15 goalies in the world when it comes to lacrosse. But you have to compare those goalies to other goalies, and I think both of them could be backups on teams. Granted, like I said, they're still very good goalies, not to take away from their accomplishments, because they're both accomplished goalies. But again, such a short amount of time between games and a very, very tough schedule for them. I'm interested to see if their offense can put up enough points to kind of keep them in it, because I don't know how much I would rely on what was a spotty defense, which led to spotty goaltending.
Yeah, absolutely. Their defense definitely had a bit of a tough time, and they have Jesse Bernhardt now and Reese Eddy, which are two big additions on defense, which is
Agreed.
good. But at the same time, they lost Ryan Flanagan, they lost Joel White, they lost Mike O'Neill. Those guys, not John Prendergast, but Joel White and Mike Manley, Mike O'Neill, Ryan Flanagan. Those were wing guys, LSM guys, close to you guys, short stick defensive midfielders, and they were all on the excused inactive list for this season, this 2020 championship series, which was a huge loss, I think, for them, because they're basically playing with a brand new defense, even though they improved other aspects of the roster.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things similar to the Water Dogs, where it's such a new unit, specifically for the Chrome, such a new defensive unit, that they're going to need a very, I would almost say, some luck to really push them over the edge. Their offense is there. I don't know how much I like the disappearance of Romar Dennis to the Atlas for them, but their offense is definitely there, especially on the attack side of the ball. But shoddy defense isn't going to win you anything. And shoddy defense leads to shoddy goaltending. So if their defense isn't, half decent, don't expect their goalies to do anything outstanding. I think that was a big reason why they lost so many games by such, little goal differential, was just spotty defense, because John Galloway can't stop every ball. He can only do so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of the Chrome success hinges at the face-off position. You've got the milkman, Connor Farrell, who, you saw what he did in his rookie season last year. He did phenomenal. Big guy, and he shed like 35 pounds, I think he said on the podcast, of fat, and has just been getting in better shape. And then you also have Hunter Forbes, who I think a double-edged sword at face-off is going to be absolutely huge for just the intensity and the closeness of these games. And Hunter Forbes has a twist because he doesn't go moto grip or standing neutral. He has an odd sort of combination of the two. So I think those two are going to pack a huge punch. It really hinges on if their wings can help them out enough so that they're consistently on offense rather than playing defense. And with the loss of Joel White on Farrell's wing, and I want to say Mike O'Neill, but that might be wrong. But he lost both of his wing guys this year. So
Yeah.
it really depends on those.
I really like the tandem there. However good Connor Farrell is, I think having Hunter Forbes there is definitely a good thing. Connor Farrell isn't known for his wherewithal, his stamina, his ability to take face off after face off after face off. I think realistically speaking, there's only one player in the PLL that should be the only face-off guy on their team, and that's Trevor Baptiste. There's other teams that are doing it. The Whip Snakes come to mind, in particular. And Chaos. So obviously, good face-off, face-off positions, I guess, around the league. But in particular with the Chrome, having two face-off guys that are different will help. With such a short weekend. Looking at their schedule, wrapping things up with the Chrome, they you can't really predict much here. It's hard to project how a team is going to do with such a small league that has so much talent on each team. Again, the Chrome could have that Chrome back they were talking about. I think the Chrome are favorable in their matchup against the Chaos, but I think things are going to go downhill from there. I don't think having Redwoods second is good. I don't think having Water Dogs last is good. But then again, projecting in this league is very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the Chrome, so many of those games that they played last year could have been won just by one 2-goal difference. So I think they're going to want it. It really just depends on how all the new players they picked up out of the player pool can really mesh.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to say the least. But I look forward to seeing what Chrome can do in its second season and how they can improve in general. So we'll move on to arguably the best team in the PLL, and that is the Redwoods. I'll let you take this one, Ben.
Yeah, so the Redwoods are my go-to team, mainly because of their Notre Dame roots. But yeah, I mean, the Redwoods, they had a great roster last year when they lost to the Whip Snakes in a heartbreaking overtime loss in the championship. And they didn't change too much on the roster. Some notable losses was Matt Landis, a huge staple of the defense, is going to be out this year and potentially even more in the future for the military reserve list. He's fulfilling his military requirements. And the recent loss of Jules Hennenberg at attack was a tough loss. Jules, unlike Tucker Durkin, did not test positive for COVID. He had COVID in early June, did the routine quarantine, felt good, showed only mild symptoms, but then he's felt good since and has been training since. But he showed up like all players did. They got EKGs, another test run on their cardiovascular health, and it turns out that Jules is having a really bad oxygen saturation rate, which just puts him at a risk of his heart overworking, especially in intense physical conditions like a professional lacrosse game, combined with the fact that it's at a higher altitude than what he's used to. So in the end, Jules and Nat St. Laurent, the coach of the Redwoods, just decided it wasn't worth it. So, I mean, while the rest of the roster is pretty much intact, you have a huge departure at attack and a huge departure at defense. And then you got Greg Garillion, who just retired after playing for the Redwoods. One of, if not the greatest face-off
Trevor Baptiste is better. Not to throw shade.
Trevor Baptiste, at the end of his career, will probably be better.
Yeah.
Right now, Greg Garillion is the top of the leaderboard by all means. He didn't really show it last year, in my opinion. So it'll be interesting. They drafted Peyton Smith from Marist College with the third overall pick of the draft not the third overall pick. I don't know why I said that. 6th overall pick. And then they also picked up
Greg.
Greg Skoljan, a face-off guy from the MLL, who he's like a career 55%er, which is really good. So hopefully those two can work out to be a pretty good tandem to fill the hole that Greg leaves. And I mean, you already had a really strong attack, but with Jules leaving, I think Clark Pedersen, he stepped up huge in the championship game, got 4 goals. I think that's going to be a big part. He's going to have to take a starting role. And then I can only assume that they replaced Jules Henenberg with Brennan Gleason from the restricted roster. He's the only attackman on the restricted roster. So Gleason, Pedersen, Kavanaugh, Garnsey, all ND guys. So hopefully they're used to each other. They're used to running the same type of offense. And midfield, nothing really changed there, except you gave John Sexton some backup at LSM and Hugh Grants. Sexton's a huge piece. He could play some close D if necessary. And then, again, the Sergio Salcido for Miles Jones trade is going to be huge. I think Miles Jones, big guy, very muscular, physical. He's been working on his two-way play, just like Sergio Perkovic has been. I think those guys can be really, really dangerous. Both big guys. You're not gonna want it to run into one, but if you try avoiding one, you're probably gonna run into the other in midfield.
Yeah, I agree with mostly everything you said. I don't see the Jules Heningberg loss being as big as people would project it to be, especially with how their midfield changed with Miles Jones. I would imagine that their scheme would change substantially compared to last year with Miles Jones and Perk being there. Obviously, 2 big midfielders. I would imagine that with or without Henenberg, that something would change offensively. So, I'll make a comparison here, I guess. If MJ gets hurt, Rodman's there, or Pippen's there, whoever you want to use. So Henneberg's down. I think Kavanaugh or Garnsey is going to be there. I don't think all the stuff Henneberg did is going to be gone. I think it's just going to be transferred on to somebody else. So you'll just see another Redwoods attackman shine. I think the only 2 things I'm questionable about on the Redwoods is their defense, only because of no Matt Landis. So that'll definitely be interesting. And then their face-off position. I don't know if a 4-game tournament is the best time to figure out who your best face-off guy is. Obviously, these guys aren't, picking up a lacrosse stick for the first time in this tournament. But if one guy's substantially better than the other, you got to be willing to go to him right away. You can't take your time and really pick and choose who's going to be the go-to guy because there's not much time to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge point. You could kind of feel it out if it was a regular length season, but they're going to have to make a decision fast. I mean, preferably before the games start and right after training camp.
Yeah, I mean,
off training camp.
No matter the team, I think that's a big point that we haven't made yet is coaches are going to have to be strict. They're going to have to make decisions. If Paul Rabel doesn't look it out on the field starting, is it worth it putting Romar Dennison instead of Paul Rabel? Just because you have big name guys here and there, it's not worth chancing it. You only have 4 games, and you got to do as well as you can.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we had a lot of guys, funnily enough, especially on the Redwoods, kind of exploded onto the scene a little late in the league, and there's not really going to be an opportunity for that. I mean, you had the Jules Henneberg, who really popped off after he got traded from the Whipsnakes. And then you had Ryder Garnsey, who was signed as an undrafted free agent and then didn't really play until he impressed in week 4. So, I mean, it's guys like that aren't really going to get a chance to kind of figure it out. You're not going to get that playing time because the stakes are a lot higher with 4 games before the elimination round.
Yeah. Wrapping things up with the Woods, I think looking at their schedule, obviously, again, hard to project. But just at a glance, I see two tough games at the bookends of their schedule with the Whipsnakes and the Atlas, with a soft, gooey middle with the Chrome and Chaos. But then again, you never know how a team could play, and projections are pretty much useless in this league.
Yeah.
Moving on to the newly formed Water Dogs. I don't think there's too much to talk about that hasn't already been talked about, except for what could be. I don't know how many people know about hockey in general, or I guess just expansion teams, but you get expansion teams that can come in like the Las Vegas Golden Knights and surprise. You can have expansion teams come in, though, and be trash. Like we've said, the talent pool in this league is insane. So the Water Dogs, on paper, should do well, but they very well could fall apart. I see very few holes in this team, except at goalie. It's going to be, again, it's one of those things similar to the Redwoods face-off. You got to make a decision. You can't be toying around with who's a goalie. Obviously one of them is going to be disappointed. But the coaches are there to win a championship. They're not there to make buddy-buddy with everybody on their roster. Obviously, that's a plus side. But at the same time, you got to pick DeLuca, or I'm just going to call him Charlie. I'm not even going to try his last name. But yeah, you got to make that tough call. I mentioned, I don't see much wrong with this roster. I really like it. I think they have a lot of depth. These are pretty much a roster compiled of everybody that was either oddly a number one guy or a number two guy on their teams last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. The main hole is at goalie. Charlie Cipriano was backup for Chaos last season, but then you got Matt DeLuca, who was huge, big, tall guy at the University of Delaware that they just drafted. It's again, you can't really have a goalie battle, right? So if you're putting in DeLuca, you got to hope he shines. If you're putting in Cipriano, you just got to hope that he has a really solid, backup or better season, And I guess face-off is a little bit of a potential liability, but they brought over Jake Withers, who has excelled in the NLL with his face-offs. And you also have Drew Simino, who was previously on the Chrome and did a great job. It just didn't make much sense to keep Simino on that roster last season when you had Connor Farrell, so they traded him.
Yeah, I agree. I think, like I've mentioned, it's hard to project what this roster could do. They could obviously surprise. We don't have to finish with the Water Dogs right now, but I want to go on to their schedule really quick. I'm not sure. Again, projections. I know it's getting annoying at this point, but projections are really tough. I don't like how they start their I'll call it their season or their tournament. I don't like how they start it. The Atlas are going to be a tough opponent. They are out for revenge, really. I mean, they were bad last season. They don't want to be bad again. They got a lot of pressure. And their team's good this year. Like, seriously good. But yeah. Again, projections are tough. I think the end of their schedule is relatively easy. But just how the Water Dogs could turn it out at the end, so could the Chrome, so could the Chaos. So yeah. One last thing, actually. I really, really, really like Christian Cuccinello on their attack. I think he was super underrated, and I think he's going to have a huge chance to shine. But again, who's going to start an attack, we don't know. I think Cuccinello could shine there, though. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was underutilized, and then I think a Cuccinello, Reeves, and Drenner starting attack is just pretty deadly.
And then even with McCardle and Berg coming behind them, I think depth at attack is definitely not a concern for the Water Dogs.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, Westberg didn't really get a fair shake on the Redwoods just because of how deep
Right.
our attack was. But I mean, you have Connor Kelly from the Whip Snakes. You've got Snyder and Drenner also from the Whip Snakes. And then Reeves also from the Whip Snakes. Those are 4 of the Whip Snakes' best offensive players, and they all ended up on the Water Dogs right after winning a championship. So these guys know how to win, and my bet is they're pretty pissed that the Whip Snakes chose to protect their arguably worst defense rather than these phenomenal offensive players.
Agreed. Last thing, I guess, on the Water Dogs is I think they might be a little top heavy. Their defense obviously good, being one of 7 teams in the league. But not to discredit any of the guys on their defense, but I don't see any superstars, if you will. I think like similar to the Chrome. I think they need to come out and play well on defense. If they don't, their goalies are going to suffer, obviously, and that's just going to leave a ton of issues on that team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the only person you can really point to as a potential star player is Zach Courier, who's coming over this year. So we'll see how he matches up in the more competitive PLL.
Agreed. Finishing things up here, we'll end with the reigning champs, the Whip Snakes. Shocker here. I don't know if you agree with me or not. I don't see them being coming anywhere close to repeating.
Yeah, not at all, in my opinion.
Defense, their defense is good. They kept that defense intact, so I got no problems there. They have one of the best goalies in the league and a solid backup. So if Brindley needs some rest or can come in, he'll be fine. I don't see, the only place I see holes really is that attack. And Matt Rambo was the reason that Whip Snakes team was good. But you have to remember they had Drenner on that team. And Drenner took attention away from Rambo. Like there's no denying it. Rambo wasn't some elite talent that just had 6 guys, or Rambo wasn't an extreme talent that would just get double teamed, find his way out of it, and score. You're stupid if you think that having Ryan Drenner there wouldn't take attention off of Rambo. It easily could have been the other way around, where Rambo got all the attention and Drenner was the all-star attackman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And looking at their attack now, I don't think anybody screams, huge talent like Drenner did. I don't think anybody is going to draw enough attention away from Rambo to allow him to do what he did last year. So obviously it could be a different situation where Rambo gets all the attention and guys like Jake Carlson or Zed Williams gets the ball and does what Rambo did. But it'd be odd to see it twice, especially on the same team, back-to-back years.
Yeah. Just go off that. It wasn't even just Drenner that took away the attention. Ben Reeves also on attack.
Right, yeah.
Huge piece of that Whip Snakes attack. And then you also got Drew Snyder at midfield. And, I mean, if you look at it, I see maybe Zed Williams filling in the role of Reeves or Drenner, but I don't really see anyone who steps up to the plate to fill in the hole that is left by Snyder at midfield. So I think the Whip Snakes got a massive downgrade in their offense, which was a pretty key component of their team. And then while they obviously opted to lose out on offense in order to protect their defense, which they considered a unit, and they made that a priority. I just wonder if maybe it would have been better to lose a defenseman or two and fill in that defense with draft picks or something.
Right, and that's not necessarily saying that they have to keep an attackman like Drenner or Reeves. But I'm looking at their midfield, and notably, you see Chanachuk and Bernhardt, and beyond that, you just see more so role player guys in the relatively talented PLL that we have. I think Max Tuttle and John House are going to have to step up more than they probably would have otherwise if the Water Dogs weren't a team. So the only problem I see here is lack of offense compared to last year. I don't think the Whipsnakes are going to be as high-powered as they were last year, and I think that's one of the main reasons that they did so well. But obviously, defense wins championships, not to be cheesy by any means, but if you have Michael Earhart pushing the ball up, who is he going to be confident passing it to on these fast breaks? Not to discredit anybody on the Whipsnakes, but taking away 2 to 3 of your best options really limits it. But again, projections are tough to make, and I think that this team could surprise. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think they'll be solid, but I don't think they'll shine.
And I guess to conclude on the Whipsnakes, looking at their schedule, I see what could be disastrous for them. They have probably the toughest 4 games in the entire PLL, and probably in the worst order you could think of. Redwoods starting off. Again, Redwoods are one of the top 2 teams in the league this year, and I see that being a loss for them, for the Whips. Then you're followed up by the Atlas, and the Atlas want revenge on the Whipsnakes, like they do every other team. The Atlas are the other top team in this league with the Redwoods. I think the Atlas and the Redwoods are the teams to beat this year, followed by the Chaos and the Archers, who aren't to be taken lightly. Obviously, like I've said 1,000 times, projections are hard to make. But the Whipsnakes could see a very upsetting follow-up to what was a spectacular season last season.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And I think they're almost set up for failure in that regard. They've got a really tough opening matchup. Redwoods versus Whipsnakes is the first game, revenge game. I think the Woods are just going to take it home to the Whipsnakes, really, really hammer them. But then you have a 5-day gap. And while that could be a benefit for them to rest up, it could also let them get rusty. And then they play the Atlas, who I think is the second best team, going to be the second best team right behind the Redwoods. And then you have, from that's on July 30th. Then you have a game on the 31st, and then the 2nd for the Whipsnakes, followed by the elimination round just 2 days later. So I think that back end is going to be really, really tough for them.
Yeah.
Regardless of how those games shake out for them, I think just 3 games in 4 days, followed by elimination round games 2 days later, is pretty significant disadvantage.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. I think it'll definitely be an interesting PLL Championship Series season, with definitely a lot of question marks. So yeah, thank you, Ben, for coming on. You can check Ben out on Instagram at Full Tilt Lacrosse, so definitely check that out. Post super, super good content for all lacrosse leagues, including the NLL, MLL, and across the United States and the world. But yeah, thank you, Ben, for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good discussion.
So yeah, we'll continuously post videos for this entire PLL Championship Series. Ben will be joining us for a multitude of them. And yeah, we'll talk after every day, what happened, analysis of it, and make some more impossible projections. So yeah, make sure you tune in the coming days to see the rest of that, and definitely enjoy the PLL Championship Series. And to conclude, thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because YouTube likes to push these videos down because of how long they are. So definitely support the channel. And thanks again, Ben, and we'll see you next time.